there is an album that has been made. Oh my God, it's called the Kotelemela Bolingo. That's Resistance in Love. And this is in the Congolese language of Lingala. Today, my brother, my sister, we're going to be paying a lot of tribute to Assata Shakur. And of course, we'll also be paying some big tribute to the great Patrice Lumumba. In this edition, I will be talking to my guest, O.B. Eguna Jr. He's the External Relations Officer. Yes, Zimbabwe-Cuba Friendship Association, Russell Squaz. The third is also going to be joining us pretty soon, and he's the Racist Mitigation and Restorative Justice. And of course, we're going to be having fun on the show. This is the UrbanBlend, and my name's certainly Black Rasta, Garnet's #1. Are you ready? So, my brother, good afternoon to you. I know it's early in America.
Yeah.
How are you doing?
Yeah. Good morning, my brother. How are you?
I'm doing very much okay, and thank you so much for accepting to join us.
Man, it's an honor to be on with you.
Oh my God, have mercy. Oh my God, have mercy. I am so excited about this project of yours that is happening, and it is supposed to be a tribute to Assata Shakur. Is that correct?
It is it's a tribute to Assata Shakur, the aunt of Tupac Shakur, and Pauline Lumumba, the wife of Patrice Lumumba. That's what it's for, and it's a springboard to call for the African diaspora to increase its support for the 4,000 Cuban doctors on the African continent.
Interesting. Now, tell me more about Assata Shakur that is worth celebrating.
Oh, Assata Shakur was the leader of the Black Liberation Army, which was the armed wing of the Black Panther Party for self-defense. She was a member of the New York branch of the Black Panther Party for self-defense. She ended up having to defend herself when the New Jersey State Troopers tried to take her life. She was charged with murder, but it was self-defense. She was shot in the back. They sentenced her to life, even subjected her to being incarcerated in a male prison. She broke out of prison and spent the last 30 years of her over 30 years of her life in Cuba. And the United States responded by putting her on the FBI and Homeland Security's terrorist list. And also, the United States government had a $1 million bounty on her head all the way up until over a decade ago. And President Barack Obama added an additional $1 million to the bounty. So this music project started a few years ago with a defense campaign, an Assata Shakur Cuba defense campaign, where we had 3 objectives in mind. Number 1, to get our great sister off the terrorist list, because she's not a terrorist, she's a freedom fighter par excellence. To get the bounty off her head, which President Obama raised from $1 million to $2 million, and to get Cuba off the United States State Department's list of nations that they accuse of state-sponsored terrorism. So that's how we started. Then last year, we had we decided we would do a health project, and we would begin to focus on the 4,000 doctors in Africa that Cuba has, where they first started sending medical assistance to Africa in Algeria in 1962. And then when Assata Shakur passed in September of last year, her family invited us, they kept us abreast of a tribute that took place on May 30th. She transitioned in Cuba, so she died in liberated territory. And then we felt that this was the perfect time to go ahead and have an album in her honor. And as I don't know if you had the opportunity to hear it, Brother Rasta.
For real,
but we have punk rock on there by Africans. We have reggae music, of course. We have R&B. We have hip hop. We have spoken word poetry, and we even have opera. So it's there are 30 songs. It's a double album.
Interesting.
So Assata Shakur is worthy of being honored. She's the mother of urban guerrilla warfare. So when you think of the great Fatima Banawi, the African guerrilla fighter in Palestine, when you think of our great sisters in Eritrea, where 33% of the guerrillas in Eritrea were women, the highest level of women's participation in a guerrilla war, not just in African history, but modern history. When you think of the great women guerrilla fighters like Capitola Tasca and Teodora Gomez in Angola, you think of Tarai Ropa Nungo in Zimbabwe, Assata Shakur. Do you think of the Maroons in Jamaica? And Queen Nanny? Assata Shakur is an extension of that rich tradition of women in urban guerrilla warfare. That's who Assata Shakur is. That's why she should be honored. And right next to her, Pauline Lumumba is overlooked by her fantastic husband. But if you read Congo, My Country, his autobiography, he talks about how she was there every step of the way. And she's best known because the letter that Patrice Lumumba wrote when he was in captivity, it was to her, which people read many years later. And immediately after his assassination, she marched 100 women bare-breasted through the streets of Kinshasa with men behind them with their hands in shame, and they marched in the United Nations, which confirmed the assertion of Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah that it wasn't just the CIA involved in Lumumba's assassination, it wasn't just the Belgians and the French, but it was the United Nations as well. So that's why we wanted to use them as a springboard to honor these great women, but make this call for Cuban doctors. And we're honored to be on this station because what many people forget to mention is it was Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah and the Convention People's Party that became the first nation in the world to recognize the triumph of the Cuban Revolution on January 2nd, 1959. So we're home.
Interesting.
And Russell Schultz is here too.
Yes, good. We'll be speaking with him pretty soon. Now, in 1977, Assata Shakur was convicted of the first-degree murder of New Jersey State Trooper Wetner Forrester. Tell me about this.
So, one of the most interesting things about that incident on the New Jersey Turnpike is that there were 3 people involved at that moment. Assata was one of them. She asserts in her book that she was shot in the back. She had her hands up and she was shot in the back, but also Sundiata Acoli was there. And this event, we have to put in context specifically in knowing that these are freedom fighters, really excellent freedom fighters, bar none, in the States. They are part of a cell. They are doing guerrilla warfare, and they just happen to get stopped by a police officer. And that is when, shots rang out. And very similar in my case, Assata tells about, in my dad's case, Assata tells about that incident of being shot by police officers, state troopers specifically, on the Jersey Turnpike. But what happens also is because they are guerrillas, they actually never really tell who did what specifically. Who did the shooting of the police officer and who shot them. She says she was shot by the police officer. She knows that. She knows she was shot in the back with her back turned, but the police officer was shot also. And obviously that was an Assata because she was being shot at that time. But our elders and comrades haven't released that specific information about who specifically shot the cop. And that is something that needs to be said and recognized. Also, like I said, in my dad's case, 5 people did life for the murder of a police officer because they wouldn't say who actually murdered the police officer. So they gave them all life. And this is very similar with Assata's case and this whole thing around police lives being more valuable than a civilian life. And so it's okay if you take a civilian's life, but if a cop is killed in the States, they will go on forever until you die and sometimes after you die, still wanting retribution.
Interesting.
I hope that helped in the answer.
Interesting. Thank you so much for that. Now, you are actually celebrating these two beautiful women. How is that related, Russell, to this Cuban doctors issue? Tell me that.
So the intersection with the Cuban doctors are many, but the ones that stand out are the fact that these Cuban doctors are trained in some of the techniques and use some cures and medicines that aren't even used in other parts of the world. That should be said, basically because of sanctions and things like this, and because of the United States basically downplaying the work of Cuba in general across the board, but definitely downplaying the work of these institutions, these medical institutions that consistently have turned out high quality doctors and have offered that service, not just to America, but globally, to Africans, to South Americans. You can go to Cuba and learn how to become a doctor, not at the prices that you would pay at Yale or Harvard or anything like that, but become as good or better a doctor than those doctors. But Cuba has also sent out medicines, sent doctors here to the United States for COVID. Folks refused them. The United States refused them. The United States put pressure on Caribbean nations, other nations on the continent, diaspora Africans, to not accept the Cuban doctors, to send the Cuban doctors back home. And that is unheard of to me. And the fact that some countries did what the United States did, what Trump told them to do, is just unheard of and unacceptable in an African standpoint, that comrades would send you doctors, and then the oppressor would tell you, don't take the doctors, and you would listen to the oppressor. You know, and so these are the intersections with the doctors. Not only that, Cuba trains doctors, Cuba outsources doctors, Cuba sends these doctors globally to countries to provide service. You know, and so that's unheard of. No other country does this at the level that Cuba does it. You know, you'll have these other orgs, you know, Docs Without Borders and all, nothing compared to the work of the Cuban doctors coming out of Cuba.
Right. Thank you so much for that. Now, Obi, tell me, what do you know about Assata Shakur that we don't know about?
Everything that Russell and I have reinforced, but the fact that she spent over 30 years in Cuba, and we felt that it was very important to connect her legal situation to the current situation that Cuba faced. And one of the best attributes of Black Panther tradition is Cuban solidarity. But not only that, the fact that the Panthers' free healthcare clinic program basically set the backdrop for the United States to have community clinics today. So the fact that we focused on medicine, and since we know that, as in the words of Comandante Fidel Castro, he says that the Cuban doctors are their greatest army, greater than the guerrillas that fought in the Sierra Maestra Mountains, greater than the Cuban guerrillas that fought side by side with us in Angola, greater than the Cuban guerrillas that Che Guevara brought to the Congo after Lumumba was assassinated, ready to take down Lumumba and bring the Congolese national movement back to power. So the fact that they equated the doctors with that, and the fact that in Africa we saw what they did in Liberia, Guinea, and Sierra Leone when they confronted the Ebola pandemic 12 years ago. We remember when the Global Fund established the HIV/AIDS Millennial Fund, and Cuba said they didn't have money because of the blockade imposed on them, but they would send a brigade of HIV/AIDS specialists that would remain in Africa until HIV/AIDS was eradicated. We know they sent 57 brigades to 40 nations during the corona pandemic. So there, and as a matter of fact, I wrote a children's play about their doctors called Cuba's Greatest Army 14 years ago. So this is something that we've always wanted to promote. And you're right there in Ghana now. The largest highway is named after George Bush because he's a born-again humanitarian, and he claims that his foundation has tested more African women for breast and cervical cancer. You see the collapse of the United States Agency for International Development. So we think that this is the perfect time, in the name of Assata Shakur, a working tribute for her and a working tribute for Pauline Lumumba, for Africans throughout the diaspora to begin to assist the Cuban doctors' medical efforts on the African continent. And right now, there's an effort by graduates of the medical school, the Latin American School of Medicine, that they're beginning to send. They started an organization called the International Medical Society of Elam, and they're starting to send micro brigades of doctors that were trained in Cuba to places in the world where the Cuban doctors have a physical presence. Last August, they spent 30 days in Guinea-Bissau. Right now, they're planning a trip to Mozambique, and they plan to eventually touch down in Burkina Faso and Grenada before the end of this year. So when we're talking about investment in Africa, people are usually talking about financial investment. We should be focusing on this project because this gives us a chance to deal with the healthcare crisis on the African continent. And who better to get behind than Cuba, because they are nothing but an extension of the African experience.
Right. How important are these Cuban doctors to Africa? And how about the statement that African nations actually broke ties with Cuban doctors?
That's the thing that's been powerful. As 7 nations in the Western Hemisphere broke ties, not one African nation budged. And that is because of the friendship associations that Cuba has. I myself, I'm the external relations officer of the Zimbabwe-Cuba Friendship Association. So just all humanity, as a matter of fact, Brother Rasta, between 1986 and 1996, 3,000 Zimbabwean teachers were trained in Cuba at the Isle of Youth. And they are the reason that today Zimbabwe has a 97% literacy rate. The first Secretary General of our organization, now with the ancestors, was the Comrade Pasternak. He was the first one to go through that program. So when you see what they're doing, and they're also important because of the brain drain. Because when they show up at these African nations, they go to the medical schools the first day, and they say, how many of you are going to remain in your countries regardless of political hardships, economic hardships, or social hardships? Wow. And those students that raise their hands, they say, we are the ones we're going to train. So in addition to treating the sick in the villages of Ghana, the villages of Nigeria, the villages of Sierra Leone, the villages of Madagascar, they're training the future doctors of Africa. And look at it from this context. This is a nation that is on the verge of finding a cure for Alzheimer's disease. This is a nation that has the most advanced program for autism in the world. This is a nation that is on the verge of finding a cure for cancer. This is a nation that has created a treatment that prevents the amputation of limbs of people who are plagued with diabetes. And remember, the World Health Organization told us back in 2010 that between 2010 and 2038, 57 million people will die from non-communicable diseases. For your listeners who may not know what I just said, that's cancer, that's diabetes, that's heart attacks, that's strokes, who now those diseases have surpassed malaria, cholera, and AIDS as the #1 killer of the human being. And I was with President Mugabe when he took us to, I used to be the U.S. correspondent to Zimbabwe's national newspaper, the Herald. And we went to a meeting with all the African heads of state and the WHO. And they felt compelled to warn Africa first because they claimed that we have the most compromised health infrastructure. So this is very important to give those Cuban doctors our unconditional support. And that's what this project is aimed at doing.
Right. Now, what is it about Cuban doctors and Cuba actually with medicine, despite all the sanctions against Cuba from America and all that? Cuba is doing so well with medicine. What is it specifically about Cuba and medicine?
Well, it's because they take a preventative approach to medicine, where they don't wait for illness to plague a society, plague a community. And it has a lot to do with before the revolution, they had the lowest doctor per capita rate of any country in Latin America. So when the revolution triumphed, they focused on two things, literacy and health. And they made that the foundation of their revolution. So they had a literacy campaign that an African named Claudio Benitez led, and he was assassinated by the CIA. And as we remember, Che Guevara was not just a guerrilla fighter, a freedom fighter, he was a doctor. So he was just like Augustino Ito in Angola. He's just like Samuel Paranato in Zimbabwe. Doctors who don't only heal the sick, or nurses like Samora Marshall. We don't just liberate the oppressed, it's African culture to heal the sick. And Cuba considers themselves an extension of Africa, so that's why they approach healthcare with compassion, decency, and integrity.
Interesting. I just see that you have come out of your car and you're taking a walk, and yeah, I mean, I can see you're very busy. I mean, talk to me about this album that you have released. What do you expect to achieve from that? First and foremost, let me first ask though, how did you get all these artists together? Who funded it? How much did it cost you to put together this album for the project?
That's an excellent question.
Excellent question.
That's an excellent question. And
go ahead, Russell, to knock it up.
Yeah, on the strength of Obi, his contacts, his networks, his international acclaim, his father's writings, my father's writings, the work that we've done in our communities. Like, people actually know us for doing the work, not from talking about it. So I have contacts, he has contacts. We both are musicians. I come from a hip hop background. Obi is classically trained. I played trumpet when I was a kid. Obi played the horn when he was a kid. You know, so we know music intimately. We're very passionate about music. 20 years ago, I put out one of the first and only multimedia magazines that ever existed called Blue. It came with a DVD, a CD. So if you couldn't read it, you could listen to it. If you couldn't listen to it, you could watch it. So that DVD was like this DVD. It had everything on it, and it was conscious. It was always about some issue in the streets. You know, we talked about the women's issues. We talked about Vieques. We talked about Palestine. We talked about, police brutality. All of these issues would be in a magazine, and every other month, there would be the women's issue. There'd be the Palestinian issue. There'd be the Puerto Rican issue. There'd be the African issue. There'd be all of these issues. And so from these came the Erykah Badu's, the Black Thoughts, the M1s and Dead Presidents. All of the conscious artists were coming out around that time, and I was reaching out to them. And so I have a history of producing this type of music, world music, music that is global, that covers all of the genres. And so people, when they saw this, they were like, oh, is this Blue? I was like, no, this is not Blue, but it's very similar in its packaging. And I was always saying to artists that my father's been incarcerated for 30, 40, 50 years. Can you help me get him out? Will you do a show? Will you do a PSA? Will you do a shout out? Will you just say free all of our political prisoners? And that's how we ended up with these relationships, to be able to come to artists, but also to say to them, hey, I'll do work for you. I'll do political education for you. I'll do work around trying to unionize the artists, trying to get artists better contracts, trying to get artists better work, trying to create this platform, letting them know, hey, you have a movement platform over here that you can sell all your music to. As soon as you come out with something conscious, give it to me. I'll give it to the conscious community. They'll buy it from you. And a lot of artists didn't know this. So the artists politically educated us about music, and we politically educated them about the movement, about serving their people, about community, about Patrice Lumumba, about his wife, about all kinds of things. And so it's an exchange happening.
Right.
There's a political education exchange happening.
Beautiful. Now, Russell, I realize that you mentioned your father twice so far. Tell me about your father. What happened to him? Why was he locked up?
So my father is Russell Maroon Shokes, and he was a Black Panther and a BLA general, a Black Liberation Army general. And his story is in his book, I Am Maroon, but he also wrote a book called Maroon the Implacable, which talks about his ideologies and his writings. But I Am Maroon is actually his autobiography. You know, reads like Asada or like a movie, people say, because he's escaping from prison multiple times. You know, he's shooting with cops. He's robbing banks. He's doing all of the things that a Black Liberation Army or a Panther in military struggle. Not all Panthers were in military struggle, but he was very much into military struggle. So we were in Philadelphia. We had a police chief named Frank Rizzo, who became the mayor, who is responsible for all of the police terror in all of the United States. They all learned and practiced from Rizzo in the 70s. He stripped the Panthers down naked in front of the Panther office in North Philly, tortured people, beat people, sick dogs on people, all of the stuff that you see around the civil rights movement and stuff like this. Frank Rizzo was doing this in Philadelphia long before any of the police brutality or oppression that you see that Giuliani put on New York, that Gates did in LA. Rizzo was doing this and taking his cops to train in Israel back in the early 70s. So yes, this is what it's about.
And I just wanted to add real quickly, Brother Rasta. My father is the co-founder of the Black Panther Party in London. And if my name sounded familiar to you, you read it in the message, The Spectre of Black Power by Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. Right. My father, the Osagyefo mentioned my father and Michael X in that book. And the pamphlet that he wrote, Message to the Black People of Britain, that comes from a request from my father when my father went to see him in Guinea. Wow. My father spent 2 weeks with him in Guinea, and Panaf Books published my father's essay called The Murder of Nigeria, which was the first revolutionary condemnation of the Igbo Biafran War. And before that, my father was the first African author to have his material read on BBC. And his first book in 1964, Wind versus Polygamy, was Britain's submission to the Festac Festival, as this year is the 60th anniversary of that in Dakar, Senegal. So my father and Kwame Ture of the 60s generation and the Black Power generation had the direct links to Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. That's another reason why it's an honor to be on Ghanaian radio today for the very first time.
Oh my God. I mean, you both are not new to Pan-Africanism at all. I mean, even before BEPT, you had that running in your veins. Whoa. Yes. All right, so let's get back to the album. How did you fund it? Did you pay money for it, or did you just have it pro bono?
Solidarity, 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 as Brother Russell said. Remember, Rasta, how we met you. 6 years ago, we did that virtual concert called Africa Thanks Cuba, and thank you for that powerful performance that you did. And we had artists from 7 African nations, 9 Caribbean nations, and 17 United States cities. So that was, and then before that, the way I know Brother Russell is through the internationally acclaimed hip-hop group Dead Prez. One of their members, M1, for between 2012 and 2014, we produced 3 albums of music called The Battle Cry for Cuba and Zimbabwe, which ended up with over 100 songs and artists all over the world calling for the lifting of the blockade on Cuba and the lifting of United States, European Union sanctions on Zimbabwe. And remember, I'm connected to you through Joseph Nazayo, the president of the Zimbabwe Music Association, who brought you to Zimbabwe.
Right.
So we've been connected for a long time.
Yes. And
even before that, we wrote a children's play about Cuba, because one of the things when it comes to Cuba, because of its proximity to the United States, U.S. imperialism has also used culture. We are products of the crack cocaine era, when the United States put crack cocaine in our community to overthrow the Sandinistas in Nicaragua, following the dictum of John F. Kennedy, who said Cuba's not only dangerous because of their revolutionary socialist nature, but they will inspire other nations to follow their example. So when Allende tried it in Chile, they disposed of him. And 10 years later, when Maurice Bishop and the New Jewel movement did it in Grenada for 4 years, they invaded Grenada and assassinated him. When Nicaragua did the same thing, they introduced crack into our community, biological warfare on our people, so they could generate more capital to carry out an all-out war, commonly referred to as the Iran-Contra hearings. But the movie Scarface, which many people which many hip-hop artists emulate, that is a movie to discredit the Cuban Revolution. People don't remember this. And at the beginning of the movie, Fidel Castro is talking about the Mario boat lift. And Al Pacino's character, Tony Montana, who became like a Robin Hood figure in our community, but people don't know the original intent of the movie. The movie Godfather 2, Hyman Roth is really Meyer Lansky, who prior to the revolution in Cuba, the casinos and the whorehouses and the heroin houses were controlled by the mafia in the United States. And the revolution takes over and turns all those whorehouses and all those dope spots into schools and hospitals. So, and even before that, Brother Rasta and listeners, the first 7 presidents of the United States tried to annex Cuba. So Cuba could be like Puerto Rico, occupied. Cuba could be like the Virgin Islands, occupied. Cuba could be like Palestine, occupied. But our ancestors organized 300 rebellions. And the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey and the UNIA had 40 branches in Cuba. So African resistance in Cuba goes way back, way before Fidel Castro and Che Guevara. It goes back to our ancestors who were kidnapped from Africa and were dropped there to cut sugarcane from sunup to sundown, like we did in Haiti, like we did in the Dominican Republic, which was just like us picking cotton in the United States of America, and tobacco from sunup to sundown.
Thank you so much for that. Now, what do you want to achieve with this album? Are you going to be able to raise money to support the Cuban doctors? Are you going to be able to take the name of Assata Shakur from the terrorist list in America? What really do you want to achieve with this?
A multitude of things. Yes, we want to create not just a fund, but we want the National Medical Association, who you probably heard on the album, the president, Roger Mitchell. Why is that so important? In 1896, the same year that Nehanda stood up in Zimbabwe with Kaguvi and led the first rebellion against the British colonialist invaders, what happened was we were not allowed to join the American Medical Association, because remember, this is 33 years after Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. So our ancestors, in the spirit of self-determination, said, the hell with it, excuse my language, we'll establish our own organization. So to have their support on this project is very important. And they have offered everywhere that the International Medical Society send medical students or graduates to help the Cuban doctors in Africa, they're going to send people too. We have many churches that have doctors in them and nurses in them. We want them to begin to.
This is 3FM. This is 3FM. This is 3FM. This is 3FM.